a session of status update on the sPower solar energy facility applications. Good evening, Wanda.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. At the last board meeting, the board asked staff to prepare a work session with the Board of Supervisors and to see if the Planning Commission would be interested in calling a special meeting to also attend. We do have several members of the Planning Commission in the audience, but they did not call a special meeting to have a joint work session with the Board of Supervisors. May I have the floor computer, please? What I'm going to do is go through an overview of the special use permit project and talk about the status, the review process, and then there are a few specific topic areas that board members had requested be addressed specifically. And so we'll go into those with these gentlemen here towards the end of the presentation. There are 3 special use permit applications associated with the sPower solar energy facility. The reason for this is that there are 3 separate land areas, and with special use applications, while sPower views this as one large 500 megawatt project, with special use permits you cannot have one large single special use permit that is over discontiguous areas. So that is a reason that there are 3 separate ones here. The first one is Site A, which is our SUP 18-0001. That is the largest of the 3 at 5,200 acres. 2,800 acres are proposed to be disturbed, and that is 400 megawatts of the 500 megawatts of the power. The second special use is Site B, and that one is located here on the south side of Post Oak Road. That one is 245 acres total. 200 acres is proposed to be disturbed, and it would have 30 megawatts of power. And then the third one is tucked between the 2 off of West Catharpin Road, and it is 905 acres total, 500 acres disturbed with 70 megawatts of power. I did amend the presentation since it was originally published in Novus to add a few items that were requested by various board members, and one of the items that was requested had to do with the amount of acreage that the project covers in relation to the county, in relation to the Livingston district, and we also included in there to use a measure that we'd have in our comprehensive plan, the primary development boundary versus outside the primary development boundary. So you can see here the number of acres of the site in total, what percentage of the county it encompasses, Livingston district, and then the percentage of the land that's outside of the primary development boundary. The process, the application was originally submitted in January of 2018. It was not deemed complete until March 30th of 2018, and that's important because the Board of Supervisors per code has 1 year to act on a special use application after it's been deemed complete. So March 30th of 2019 is the deadline there, unless the applicant consents to going beyond that time frame. I included here a number of iterations of our formal reviews with revisions received, and we did get approval for the consultant reviews in late October, so those have been occurring late October through November. We did receive the consultant review reports today, and we did make copies of those for board members and for the planning commissioners. They're available in a package that Amy has. And we also did post these to the board's Novus agenda, so they are available on the internet. We will also be posting them to the website where we have been maintaining project information.
Wanda?
Yes.
I will say, one of the issues I've had in trying to relay information or give information, as far as I know it, sorry, we're making noise of me, is the updates to our website with the newest status, the newest data, the newest information. From what I've gained from you, I'll regurgitate, and then I'm immediately met with rebuttal of, well, that's not what's on the website. So it's very difficult to me to try to share information with my neighbors and I don't like constituents, but my constituents, when we don't even have updated, at least fine-tuned information that we've, through your discussions with sPower, investigations with engineers, your own investigations, you know, and working through all the safety issues in this matter. So that's, I hope we can start.
Yeah, I mean, we've been putting on the website application information, so when we get a resubmission from sPower, we update that on the website. But there's a lot of communication, conversation that is just not able to be captured and put onto the website. But yeah, we have had that out there as a convenience so that people can go to the website and see what the latest and greatest application information is. We will be updating it tomorrow with some additional information, including the consultant reports.
Okay.
And some revisions that have been provided to us of some of the documents in the GDP, primarily to address some technical concerns that we noticed within them.
Okay. Well, I just, if it's like with, I don't know, but the water issues, if we've hammered out some details in that, if we could just update where we are, is the agreement going to be no wells? Are there, it's just when it's not in black and white for folks to see, they're certainly not believing anything I say.
So
at least that's the impression I get. Sorry if I insult anybody on that.
That is a good point that I actually was going to talk about in a moment here. We are moving forward to the Planning Commission public hearing. We had originally thought all 3 applications moving forward at once to public hearing, but that was not manageable. Just from a staff time perspective and pulling it together, even one in order to get it to December the 5th. We're really working very diligently in pulling that together and relying a lot on other departments and their expertise and legal review. But
Well,
we are.
Let me interrupt. Are you sure you're not rushing yourselves too much?
We are on pace for December 5th, Planning Commission public hearing, yes. We will get it done.
Okay, because there's a whole lot of information that, they're going to need the same information that we're going to need on all these, the information that we've been provided from outside with the questions and concerns that they have. And, I hope so.
The staff report and the draft recommended conditions, we're working very hard to release them on Thursday. So at that point, a lot of these questions will be answered. You will see the recommended conditions. You'll see staff's recommendation. There will be recommended conditions no matter whether the recommendation is approval or denial. So just so that everybody's aware that once we get to the publication of the Planning Commission packet, it'll be available on the county website under boards and commissions, and then click the agenda search and look for the December 5th Planning Commission agenda. And then we also have our zoning hearings notice posted at the top of the county website. If you click that, you can get to the application materials. And like I said, we'll be updating those on the website tomorrow. We have posted ads in the Freelance Star, mailed notices to properties within 3,000 feet, and signs are posted on the public road, all according to code.
One more question for you, Warren.
Yes.
I'm sorry to keep on interrupting you. I've been called by a number of folks saying this is the first time they've heard of it. And in even my town hall, there was a number of folks that came out that first time hearing about this project. Is there anything the county can do better as far as getting out these notices of these large projects like this, especially in the more rural areas? Short of sending out letters to everybody, I don't have the answers.
As part of the community meeting process, notices went out within 3,000 feet of the project. That's all on the applicant. That's run by the applicant. The first formal legal notice that's required to go out by the county is when the Planning Commission public hearing is scheduled, and the board increased that radius to 3,000 feet as well. I don't know what more the county can do. It's been a very public process in terms of being in the newspaper, and certainly discussions at the Planning Commission and board level during citizen comment. But I'm not really sure what more the county can do. We've been using, Facebook, Twitter, trying to get word out about different items. Community meetings have been on there. But really, this is the beginning of the public process. I know that this has seemed to be a very public process up until this point, but this is truly the beginning of the public process, is when the staff issues its staff report and its recommendations to the Planning Commission. We don't issue those to the citizens beforehand. We can't discuss them tonight. We're still in the process of finalizing our staff report and our conditions, so unfortunately, there are not going to be the answers that some people might be anticipating this evening. Wait 2 days and we will have those available for everybody. So I don't know at this point what more notice could be done, frankly.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. McLaughlin.
quick one. It's really actually Mr. Ross' question here, but on slide 2, I guess that's 2, it shows SUP 1, 2, and 3, site A, B, and C.
Yes.
And then we talk about on slide 4, special use permit application current status. Are all three, because you only say SUP 001, is 02 and 03 going to be on the same timeline, or are they separate?
Oh, yeah, so that's a good question. I should have covered that. So SUP 2 and 3, we're planning to have those December 19th is our plan at this point in time, to have the public hearings on those two. The Planning Commission public hearings, yes.
So those two, I guess 2 and 3 will be on the same date, on the 19th?
That's our thought at this time, yes.
Any reason why they weren't together? Or
All at one meeting, simply the fact that it's 3 separate applications. We have to do 3 separate staff reports, 3 separate packets. We are working a lot of hours just to get the first one to completion.
Okay.
And so it just was a time management, and and to address the question about rushing, we didn't want to take on something that we might not even get to actual public hearing on that evening if the first case takes hours. We have to do the whole staff presentation and hold public hearing for the second one and then the third one. So, we were thinking the chances are the public hearings would be continued to the 19th anyways.
Mr. Ross.
Okay.
Mr. Cole.
Yeah, I was just wanting to point out, your questions regarding the notice. The notice requirements that you all adopted, I believe, last year, is far in excess of the state requirements. So, I mean, I feel like we are, providing maximum notice that we can affordably anyways. Of course, you could send a certified letter to every resident in the county, but that would be cost prohibitive.
All right, thank you. Mr. Ross.
So Wanda, what I don't see is, I see, so if you're going to bring 2 and 3 back to the Planning Commission in December at their second meeting of the month, and I see when the board needs to have their final vote by March 23rd of 2019, is your intent to bring it to the Board of Supervisors in 1 and then 2 and 3, or?
We haven't, we would discuss that with county administration. What we're envisioning is that we'd hold the public hearing December 5th for the first one, the 19th for the second 2. They're going to be fairly repetitive of the first one, and the concerns and the conditions are likely to be fairly repetitive. So what we're envisioning is that if the Planning Commission continues the vote on the first one, they can also continue the vote on the second one to, say, in January, and address all 3 of them at one meeting with votes, and then they could all 3 pass on to the board, either all 3 together or separate, depending on feedback.
Gotcha. So I, Mr. Benton just said, are you rushed? I can't believe I'm saying this, but I feel that you're rushed. The citizens have brought up 15 instances of where this violates or is in conflict with our comprehensive plan. Will those things be you're going to be able to address those at the 5 December Planning Commission meeting?
Correct. We are working on our staff reports, and yes, we will be doing our own comprehensive plan analysis.
And I guess I feel that way because we don't have the study back either as of today, correct? When's that supposed to get to us?
The
Or
consultant studies are.
that's what's in my
yes,
pack, that's this
yes,
package, okay.
yes.
So we just got it today. So how are you coming up with the baseline special use permit? I know also that the citizens have put together some things that if it were to go forward would make it better. I'm not saying it's going to go one way or the other, but how are you going to decide, and that will go to the Planning Commission on 5 December. Are you ready to make that a baseline and incorporate their comments, or how are you going to do that?
Right. So we've been hearing the comments and concerns, receiving the information from the citizens, reviewing that information, researching. So, you know, we have been taking all of this into account. We have been working on conditions for the past month with the various departments that have expertise and with legal staff.
So how do you decide
So-
what goes in and what goes out? I mean, I personally would like to see them all in as a baseline, and maybe they change as we go through the process. But how's staff going to decide which one of those are going to put in as a baseline? I know that there's a 50-foot buffer as a baseline and a 300-foot buffer and a different baseline. How are you figuring that out?
Right. So we're evaluating it according to the comprehensive plan, according to the codes. We are looking at the recommendations that have come from the citizens, and we are also consulting with legal staff regarding what we can do legally in terms of conditions. So, you know, it's a process of discussion, review, examination, and then we're going to present a series of recommended conditions, and that's, I don't know what more I can say at this point.
Thank you.
So, like I said, this really begins the public hearing process. And you know, I think this is important because this project has been very public up to this point, and I think that's probably resulted in some frustration because there have been a lot of comments but not a lot of feedback back to the citizens. So that's really what this starts, and so that is one reason that we're very interested in getting this into the public process so that the Planning Commission and the board have sufficient time before the March 30th deadline to fully consider this in the public process. Staff makes a recommendation, the Planning Commission will review and make their own recommendation, and the board ultimately has the final decision. So, you know, this will evolve through that process, but getting it into the public process can really begin the discussion and provide, you know, the full set of information to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors, and give you both bodies approximately 4 months for that process, and that way you're not rushed.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Ross?
I have another question. The package we got tonight with the study, maybe you already said it, is that already out, posted on the internet, or will it be?
It is posted to the
Okay.
Novus agenda
Okay.
already, and it's going to be on the county planning
Okay.
website tomorrow.
Thank you.
So as I noted, March 30th is the deadline with the last board meeting. The regular board meeting is March 23rd before that. Just very briefly, I wanted to hit on, you know, special use considerations. Special uses are generally compatible with other land uses permitted in the zoning district, but because of their unique characteristics or potential impacts, we can look at them individually and determine if there are conditions that need to be imposed in order to ensure that they are a good fit in that location. There are 8 standards of review that are included in the zoning ordinance that will be part of the staff report that these will be evaluated against. And then the zoning ordinance also includes a list of conditions. These are sample condition types, but you're not limited to these types of conditions in the conditions that are ultimately adopted by the Board of Supervisors, should the board choose to approve these applications. For this specific topic, we've been looking at a number of major topic areas. And it's important to note that this type of project has 2 very distinct phases, one being the construction phase, which is very active, a lot of impacts, a lot of personnel on site, noise. And then the operation phase, which is a much quieter phase. We've been looking at erosion and sediment control, stormwater management, groundwater and public water, burning, emergency management, traffic road impacts, hours of operation, decommissioning and surety, heat island, panels and cadmium telluride, setbacks and buffers, vegetation, pest management, historic resource impacts, lighting, biological impacts, noise, and conformance with the comprehensive plan. Those that are starred are items that we've had some assistance with the consultants on, and then the ones that are in brown were some particular topics that the board had asked that we provide a little bit more information on in this presentation. Talk a little bit about the buffers that are proposed by sPower. This is the key from their generalized development plan. I was asked to show the plan with the buffer areas that are proposed with buildings that are nearby, and on their plan they have in red dots buildings within 100 feet of the property boundary. Between 100 and 200 they've got in orange, and then in the blue color it's up to 300 feet from the parcel boundary. So you can see here this is the SUP1 that will be moving forward December the 5th. What they have as a standard around the property is a 50-foot setback. It's greater in places because of the panel placement. For example, there are areas where there are wetland impacts, resource protection areas, so naturally the setbacks will be greater in certain areas. You can see that the areas of homes within the proximity is noted, up to 300 feet. We've got in Fawn Lake. We've got some areas along the north side of the project. And then we've got some areas here along the south side of the project on West Catharpin Road. And Chancellor Meadows Road is one of the roads that we've heard about from citizens. That's in this area. So you can see that there are clusters of residential properties with homes that are in close proximity in a few areas of the project. The applicant has provided for some landscaping and berming within those areas, and staff is further examining those areas as part of our consideration in the staff report.
Let me interrupt you, Mr. Taylor or Wanda. I'm asked for a colored copy in my packet. Looking at this black and white doesn't do me a bit of good in your. And I'd like to just have it in color.
And then again, for the second SUP, this again shows at a much larger scale so that it is more visible the existing homes that are proximate to the project. And again, for the SUP 3. The fiscal impact of the project, there is a rollback tax. Much of the land is within land use currently, so the rollback tax is a one-time payment of about $600,000. The Code of Virginia does provide tax exemptions from local property taxes, and for this particular project at its size, the exemption is 80%. The county will collect taxes at the real estate tax rate on 20% of the assessed value of the facility, and the assessed value will not come from the county's assessment office. It will actually be assessed by the State Corporation Commission. sPower did provide a fiscal and economic impact analysis, and just looking at the fiscal side, based on their value of $552.5 million, and at the current tax rate, on the left-hand side, I have the year 1 tax revenues under those assumptions, year 10, 20, and then year 24 on, and what is happening there is the depreciation is affecting the revenues that would come to the county. What is on the right-hand column, they also did an evaluation related to the composite index, and basically as the county becomes more wealthy, it pays a greater share towards schools, the state pays less. So with any project that comes in that's going to provide greater revenue to the county assumes a little bit more of the share of the state, of the school funding. So what the right-hand side does is it takes that into account and backs out that amount of money.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, oh.
Mr. Skinner.
Thank you. Wanda, okay, the one thing I've heard over and over is that we're getting 600,000 rollback. I've heard that some people say it's more than that, it's less than that. Is this an official figure?
I requested the Commissioner of Revenue provide a analysis of it, and that was as of earlier this month.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mr.
Mr. Chair,
McLaughlin.
so, quick, so this is the property tax. Do they have to pay any additional, like, personal property or machine and tool tax or anything like that on the equipment?
That's this. That's what this is.
That is
yes.
the property tax?
Yeah, the way the state code is written, they do not pay a different tax rate. They pay the lower real estate tax rate, essentially, for all of their machinery and tools.
So this is the only taxable income from the project?
From the project, yes. Yes. And moving on to some of the other topics, we've got environmental construction.
Thank you, Wanda. I don't think I know how to deal with two mics. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the Zoning and Environmental Department has been reviewing a overall stormwater concept plan. And here, through meetings, which have been weekly meetings, and through communications with our third-party independent engineering firms, that would be Sullivan, Dono, and Ingalls and Welford Engineering, that master stormwater management plan was farmed out to their engineers for comment. And then we've had meetings with other personnel to come at some of the things you see on this slide for the environmental construction aspect. There will be, I think for probably the first time, conditions in the conditional use permit relevant to environmental conditions. Usually those things are by a minimum code requirement post the approval of a special use permit. So here they're advanced up in timing prior to the actual permit for special use permit, and the things you see here will become part of a special use permit eventually. For instance, the minimum code would just entail silt fencing, typical on most commercial industrial sites. Here, this in the template that's been presented for the first zone, which is, I believe, called Zone E, which is the first SUP 001, they would be using super silt fence method, which is used on properties that have higher than normal slope. That is actual silt fencing that's trenched in with metal fencing and metal posts and metal wire behind the silt fence. So as you may have water flow toward the perimeter of the property, you'd have this really a stronger barrier. They're also going to be using, as proposed on their plan, mulching wherever possible on the site, a mulching buffer of at least 6 feet wide and 6 inches in depth that would give additional slowdown of any sediment movement and additional filtering. State law standards, when you construct and you're moving dirt, you have a sediment basin. So as water, raindrop erosion hits the land, it moves sediment downslope down contours. There will be constructed basins. These are some of the first things that'll be constructed on the site. Those basins will be oversized per the Virginia Code. And also, I think this is a very key thing, is that they will be cleaned out at a higher frequency rate. They're normally cleaned when they're at 50% full capacity. These are structures, to describe them, they're basically, if you can visualize the infield of a baseball field, and then slopes up from that baseball infield, they go up about 15 to 20 feet. Water comes in, there's a riser that goes through an embankment. Water comes in, water rises up the concrete, reinforced concrete riser. It allows for the storm surge to then filter, so that cleaner water then, if the storm goes high enough, there's an orifice that's engineer designed that will let the cleaner water out through the piping in the embankment. So in most storms, they should be contained in those sediment basins. And these sediment basins will run at the perimeter of the property. So you have your silt fence, then you have your sediment basins behind that. Then an additional thing that the construction company, Masterson, has proposed is upslope barrier protections with using siltation socks that are laid in a trench to additionally slow down sediment and contain sediment. Ultimately, those are biodegradable, where they can be cut when the project's over with, and they just provide additional biodegradable material. Another thing, after stabilization happens on a site, the state code, generally you will go in and see people take out temporary sediment basins. They're going to convert these temporary basins to permanent basins, which then will ultimately add to vegetation. A lot of times they will sometimes start revegetating into a natural state that will provide additional filtering of any water in the future that would go down slope from the ridge tops. On-site personnel have been dedicated to E&S upkeep. It's not always on a commercial industrial site, I can tell you that, but on a site this size, they're going to have on-site ready response personnel. We're getting more frequent storms, we're getting harder storms, and so when you have that first hour of a duration of storm, you get a flush of water that starts moving soil on a site. So we need to have personnel there on site where they're doing the land disturbance. Responsible land disturber is a person designated under Virginia Code to be responsible on site and on duty. They're not always required to be on duty. They have to have a certified person. That person goes through training. They have to take a test through DEQ. They have to be certified by DEQ, and they have the title RLD, Responsible Land Disturber. Masterson, the construction company that's going to be on this site, will have RLDs, certified personnel on site. Diversion windrows is another design technique that is not atypical of construction and industrial and commercial sites. Additional windrow barriers are going to be designed in their template that directs flows, so you don't have potentially too large areas going into a basin and overwhelming it. These barriers will be up at the top of the ridges. If you can visualize a Civil War trench, it's just that simple. Water goes in the ditch, it can't get out the ditch. It follows that diversion ditch, and then it's released into an area where the design basin will take that water flow. Broadcast seeding is typical and allowed on commercial industrial sites. The proposal under this environmental plan will be to drill seed for quicker seed germination, so the sites will green up faster than a typical broadcast of seed. Soil testing is not required on commercial industrial sites. Here, soil testing will be done. Amendments will be added to it if they find acid sulfate soils. Additional amendments like lime has to be incorporated and disted into the property to ensure that you get a good stand of seed mixture to come up quickly. Equipment is going to be is not. A lot of times you'll see construction equipment, and they're working on the building, and the construction site only has equipment that's dedicated to the building. Here, there's going to be construction equipment dedicated to the actual erosion controls and erosion repairs. We believe that our third-party inspectors have told us, engineering firms, that they can have certified people in drone technology. Flying a drone over an area will allow us to have video coverage. It is something we haven't done before, but it's something that it seems like it would, the sites would avail itself to it, because the drone could go down and more quickly than an individual walking the site. We had suggested also concern about areas of total open area of no more than 400 acres in aggregate. Our third-party engineering firms have assured us that they can handle 400 acres of open area through inspections protocol under the DEQ inspections mandate, which is to go to the site every 10 days or within 48 hours after a rainfall event. That's actually being increased to 24 hours after a rainfall event in new stormwater regulations. We just met with DEQ today in Richmond. That's one of the things proposed coming up in 2019. So I hope that answers some of the things we've drilled down through. We've had our third-party engineers meeting with their civil engineer, Kimley Horn. Scott Malote has been spearheading those meetings weekly. So these are some of the things that we've come up with that we think are beyond the minimum code for this project. So I'd be glad to entertain any questions.
Mr. Skinner?
Troy, quick question. You mentioned they're going to put 6-inch mulch by 6 feet wide. Was that right?
Could be. I mean, that's pretty much a standard to get some slowdown of the movement.
Is that a continuous process? Every year replenish the mulch so it's 6 foot? I mean 6 foot wide and also 6 inches high?
Well, it's important in the construction phase. After a year, this site's going to be stabilized. There's going to be Virginia grasses growing, and there should even before a bond is released, they will have vegetated sites. So the barrier is really for construction technique during the construction period. It's not designed to be a permanent technique.
Do you have a person on here, you were talking, I seen on-site 24 hours?
That's to have a person respond to the site within 24 hours, yes. We have 3 firms under procured contract. That's 3 civil engineers, and we believe we have at least 15 people we can put on that site in 24 hours if necessary, in addition to our staff.
Okay, well, my question is more, is there somebody there constantly 24 hours, or are there 3 people that doing an 8-hour tour or duty there, and then somebody comes in and replaces them?
They won't be there. Our staff won't be there 24/7, no, sir. But they are required. They are required.
Right.
The on-site people are required to do daily inspections of their site, to record their stormwater pollution protection plan daily. They have, if they drop, just say a barrel of oil tips over on that site, they have to record that. DEQ comes in, they look at their stormwater protection plan, they look for those dates. They look for consistency of recordation of everything that happens on that site. That's in addition to what the county's doing. So it's not only the county looking at the site, it's going to be DEQ looking at the site, and it's going to be their own on-site personnel looking at the site. So there's a three-layer environmental review of any construction site.
So I guess I take that then there'll be a person from that company there.
20 people,
What's that?
20 people.
20 people?
There'll be 20
yeah.
people dedicated to their ENS control measures.
Okay, so my question is then, there'll be somebody there 24 hours a day?
20 of them
Okay.
from day
So
one.
we will have,
Till
a
they
pla-
end it.
they will be looking at after everything and even at 2 o'clock in the morning or?
Well, now, I can't say about nighttime. I
Well,
mean,
that's my question. When I say 24 hours a day.
they're not going to be camping there. They're going to be reporting there every day. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, they're going to be reporting, but there's not a 24-hour watch at this site.
Well, I can't say that for sure. The fire marshal's going to comment on personnel and different phases of this construction and whether or not they have other issues. I don't want to comment to his
Sure.
part, but
Well, I'll ask him then.
they're going to be county personnel out there.
I understand that's going to be county on
Constantly,
county's
yeah.
time and stuff like this.
Yeah.
But the question that has been brought to me is, do they have somebody or do they expect to have people on their site 24 hours a day in case something happens and there's a
They're going to have a
problem.
condition on hours of operation.
what?
They're going to have a condition on hours of operation for sure.
Okay.
It's not going to be 24/7.
So just for the heck of it, we have something at 2 o'clock in the morning. We have one, and I'll use what was used tonight, the arc flash or whatever it's called. So who's going to report that?
There's an emergency operations plan in your packet.
I understand that.
For all types of contingencies that deal with that. And I think fire marshal's going to.
I'd love to hear
think-
what's going to happen on this one because, you know, as we've heard tonight, and I'm just repeating what I've heard, there's a fire, well, you want a 300 fire break, they do, but it was called an arc flash. Okay, I think Mr. Ginelli brought it up, and the fact is, from the solar panel to the inverter, there's no way to stop that. It's when you get to the inverter that you probably have a circuit breaker.
Mr. Skinner, it's my understanding they will not have personnel on site 24 hours, but one of the requests that we've made of them in these discussions, working towards a plan, is to have at least video surveillance, ongoing monitored video surveillance, not just a recording camera of all areas of the site, to be able to identify any issues occurring and to be able to report that immediately.
And that's where they will be doing that, not us.
That's where we're asking them to be able to do.
24-hour surveillance on the area,
Yes, sir.
okay? Thank you, that's one of the things I wanted to ask, that's it. Thanks.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Thank you. Question, during the construction phase and the clearing phase, there's going to be a lot of vehicles going in and out of very small roads that have high speed limits. What conditions does the county have for safety regulations? What improvements do they need to make to their entrances and exits to ensure safety on those county roads?
I believe that probably is addressed in their safety plan, their speed limits that are going to be on that site.
Well, I know that they have trucks with speed limit. I'm saying, does the county have any ordinances, any regulations, anything that we can enforce so that we put a condition on them to make sure that their entrances and exits from their site onto state roads are safe? Perhaps, deceleration lanes, things such as that, that doesn't put people that travel those roads normally, looking at 4 or 5 logging trucks that are pulling out at a time.
The in-place requirements are related to VDOT and construction entrances and their standards, so that's what's in place.
Okay, so that is what we would be using then. That would be the baseline
would
that
be
we
our
would
base.
use. Okay, thank you.
This is probably going to be one of the largest special use permits ever written in Spotsylvania County, once you see it. BJ's Wholesale Warehouse Club has 28 conditions. That's the record holder of all special use permits that's ever been approved in Spotsylvania County, 28 conditions. And BJ's Warehouse, that was pretty significant conditioning of BJ's Warehouse, which has probably been there 25 years, or 20 years at least. I'm going to have 3 code enforcement officers, myself, and a deputy. That's 5 enforcement people for the conditional use permit, to answer your question as to enforcement agents. I'm going to be there quite a bit if it gets approved.
If I
Go
can
ahead.
follow up, yeah, and I know that we all appreciate that. My concern is that do we have the teeth? Do we have the ability? Do we have the and I haven't seen your report yet, so I can't, and I don't want you to answer. Let me put it this way. I would like to see these types of things in there, because when you're talking about a site that all combined, granted they're going to phase it, and I understand phasing, and I understand how they're going to do that, but when you have a site that is that large and that impactful on an area, well, let's face it, what's the last thing built out there? You know, a house, a barn. There's not a big subdivision anywhere to be found except on the north side in Fawn Lake. So these are not roads that are used to handling something of this magnitude, nor are the people that travel them used to seeing that type of thing on these roads. So I want to make sure that the people that are traveling there and the people that are used to taking these roads are protected as much as possible, so that we don't dump out a problem and then have other problems that compound upon that, simply because we didn't think ahead of, well, what are we going to do with all those logging trucks that come out when we have school bus routes that are running that way on these little roads with these, you know, non-existent shoulders. And some of those roads, some of those turns down there, you take a logging truck through there with a couple of school buses, and it's not as safe as it or it needs to be as safe as possible, let me put it that way. And so that is one of my biggest concerns, is to make sure that during this whole process, because if you do it 400 acres at a time, 400, that's 6 pods that you're going to be doing. The total build out of something like that would be, how long have they given us a time?
18 months.
Okay, so let's, and that's in a perfect condition. So let's say roughly 2 years for them to do it. Let's just say they get backed up by weather and all. That would be anywhere from 1.5 years to 2 years of this impact on that area. And I think we need to make sure that our citizens that are traveling those areas are protected as much as possible. So, thank you.
Mr. Chair, real
Mr.
quick,
Chair,
the change to the fee structure last meeting, that
Yes,
would be
sir.
in place for this project, correct?
It
So
is.
all of those inspectors are covered by
Yes, sir.
fees charged? Okay, thanks.
Absolutely.
I think you can go on.
Yes, this is me. I'm just going to touch on these very briefly. These are just some areas that we have been discussing and are asking for attention as we move through the document. So we've had a lot of discussion over the past several months. I've probably read more on solar panels than I ever thought I would in my life over the past 3 months.
Me too.
So some of the things that we're most concerned about is making sure that both during construction and during the operation of the facility, that we have access by emergency crews in our vehicles to all areas of the site that are going to be worked on. And by that I mean passable roads that are not going to be muddied or having ruts in them that we can't navigate with some of our larger vehicles if we need to get them back there. So that is a discussion that's ongoing, trying to actually, even I think as recent as today, trying to identify some maps of some of the roadways that will be in there. And discussions about the construction of those roads as far as to what standards, making sure that they are going to be compacted to the level that will, I guess, essentially to VDOT standards for the compaction, to be able to carry the weight of the vehicles that we have, as well as any bridges or anything to cross over streams and so forth, however those are constructed. They would be expected to be to that same standard. Other issues that we're trying to deal with are just general safety to the people in the environment during construction operation. That kind of covers the entire gamut of this operation, making sure that through the emergency response plan for the construction phase of it, as well as the operation, it addresses the needs of dealing with things both on site and immediately adjacent to that, as far as the property owners surrounding it. So I think we've gone through that in pretty well detail as far as the requirements that we would expect as far as training and capability of the solar farms personnel, the training that they would need to have, the equipment they would need to have to be able to respond initially and to report emergencies on site, and then to contact us, as well as provide training specialized regarding the photovoltaic panels and systems to our department, so that we can handle any kind of emergency that occurs on scene. So that has been part of the discussion, as well as has been a part of the discussion for a lot of people, is available water on site. And realizing that that area of the county, there are very few static water sources that we can actually draw water from. And some of the topics of discussion are locations of essentially tanks, above ground reservoirs, and the availability of water within those, not only for use for emergencies on site, but that would be accessible from the entrances, so that we could actually use those in the community surrounding the actual facility. So looking to make sure that any improvements are made available to the rest of the community there as well. Landscaping, excuse me, to reduce the chance of potential fire spread. We've been discussing the incorporation of fire breaks, the various landscaping that needs to occur, tying that into roadways, so that if a fire does initiate in one of the arrays, that we essentially are able to contain it before it spreads off-site. Whenever we confront a fire, whether it's in a type of facility, anything like this, or even in someone's home, we first try to make sure that we protect the exposures, we confine the fire, and then we extinguish it. So that's the same type of operation that we would be undertaking in this situation, where we would try to protect the outside properties first, confine the fire within the facility, and then extinguish it. So a lot of discussion about that and how to make sure that all areas are contained within that as far as fire spread. Primary consideration being of the vegetation that's going to be in the facility. And finally, just because of the potential for incidents on site, and realizing there's additional needs that we've been discussing for years in that area of the county in Shady Grove, for the additional placement of a fire station sometime in the future, looking at the possibility of identifying some property for that. Again, both to serve the site as well as their neighbors. So those are a lot of the things that we've been discussing so far, trying to make sure that, especially on the last point, it would actually have to be very, very usable property that would serve the entire community. And quite honestly, it may have to be off-site of what the property currently exists, because it's a little bit too far west for where we're looking.
Sure. Chief, if you could, how big are the tanks we're looking at?
I believe they are two 50,000-gallon tanks that would have to be maintained at 50% fill, so carrying 25,000 gallons in each of them at all times.
And have we discussed how wide the fire breaks are going to be because of the potential I'm gonna go back to it all the time. If you, that flash point where, fire, yeah, arc fire, arc flash,
Right.
excuse
The
me.
greatest potential for fire spread in this facility is going to be through the vegetation that's on it.
That's right.
It would depend upon the terrain, but we're looking for really a minimum of at least 8 feet fire break all around the facility, including roadways to have that tied into it. So that would be areas that would be maintained low enough, essentially no taller than the grass you would have on a well-maintained lawn.
Well, here's my concern about that. I do have a concern. I don't think 8 foot. I've just watched for the last month how many fire wiped out the entire homes, town, out in the west. And, you know, if we don't know what the winds are going to be like when we do have a fire, so I hope you're considering worst case scenario. You've got a 20-knot wind coming across, and you've got a fire. How quick is it going to spread, and how many of those ashes or burns are going to go across? Because that is one of the biggest concerns I have, is to contain the fire that you have inside that. And personally, what I've seen on TV so far and all the lives we lost, 8
Yes, sir.
feet,
Nothing,
8 feet is
nothing
not.
nothing to speak against the concern that's there for that, and the tragedy that's occurred in California, as well as many places out west. And not to say that it would never happen here, but fires do burn a lot different in the wildland here versus California, just because of the type of vegetation that they do have. It's much oilier, I can't say that word, and a lot of the terrain, as well as essentially they're having hurricane force winds all of the time. So there will be areas that would probably need to be wider than that, just based upon slope, but on flat land, a fire break of that wide, you know, it's really about the same as a driveway that we rarely have conditions that we would not be able to tie a fire lane or fire line into that. So
And currently, where is the closest fire station located to this project?
the closest to any portion of the project would be Fire Company 7 in the wilderness.
And its response time would be how much to that place, to that area?
It's a few minutes down the road from the entrance, but realizing the size of this facility, to get to different places within the facility, you're talking an extended amount of time. So that's part of the reason that we would send multiple stations for anything in there. We'd have to figure out what the response time is going to be. But most likely, we would probably send the first arriving unit or first due unit to the closest neighborhood to make sure that we're protecting exposures, and then go from there.
On those 50,000 required at 50% or 25,000 gallon tanks of water,
Yes, sir.
how are we getting the water to there? Is it pumped in from another, or is it brought in by truck and loaded, or how is
It's
that?
my understanding that it would be, that the facility would haul it there via truck from whatever site they're accessing water.
So if you put in a 50,000 gallon tank, why do we minimum at 25,000? Why do we say you only have to half fill it?
They were planning on using that water from time to time for, I guess, regular maintenance and other tasks.
I understand that, but
So they don't want, we're basically saying don't drop it below that 50% rate while they're actually using water on site.
okay, so they can't go below 25,000?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it'll be above 25,000 at all time?
Yes, sir.
And is that available for fires,
Yes.
from you guys and everything else?
That's what we're asking, yes.
And that's sufficient enough, you think, for a total of 50,000, because you got two tanks at 25 or 20? It could be 50 or 100,000. Let's say they're both full, and that's going to be sufficient?
Yeah, that's 25 or 50,000 more than we currently have.
Well,
It's a.
I asked the question
Right,
whether it is sufficient.
It really all
enough.
depends on the size of an incident.
That's right.
And what we have in there, I think as far as a vegetation fire, it's going to be more rakes on the ground and bulldozers digging things up.
Okay.
So I think that would probably be sufficient.
I'd certainly be looking at that, and some, how you got to that point. Okay? That's all I got. Thank you, sir.
Anybody else? All right.
Just want to give the board a basic idea of some of the key functions or key considerations we look at in terms of the potential for public drinking water access. This goes not only for sPower, but any major rezoning, special use, or anything that have a potential impact on the system. Some of the basic considerations that we go through in this evaluation is, one, is a connection mandated? Is it within the primary settlement area? Is the water main directly on the property that would require the connection of the use to the facility? The size of the connection, how much water can they take, or how much water they're actually looking to consume off the distribution system. Obviously, the larger the volume, it requires more review time and more evaluation to determine the impact. And really the ultimate goal of that is to ensure there's no adverse impacts to the existing customers or overall distribution system from any new connection proposed. In terms of looking at what those adverse impacts are, we evaluate the overall pressure zone health. Basically, the distribution system is divided into different pressure zones based on where tanks are and pumping stations and things like that. And this is actually located within the Fawn Lake zone. So when we look at the overall pressure zone health, we look at redundancy issues, we look at fire flow, we look at the static and residual water pressures. Static is basically what you have at the tap. Residual is when you have a large flow like an irrigation demand, a fire flow demand, or something like that coming off the system. We look at the available water tank storage, the actual overall finished water availability, that's basically our plant production, and water quality. And then we also take a look at the proposal to determine if there's any system improvement opportunities that could be associated with that creates a benefit to the overall distribution system. And once we get into the actual staff report, we'll obviously go into much more detail on some of these features that were evaluated. Right now, based on the conversations we've had today, the potential sPower connection is looking for a desired volume of around 100,000 gallons a day for construction, and then that will drop down to about 350 gallons a day, which is basically equivalent to a normal residential connection during operations. It's really not that much to be drawn. It is not mandated by ordinance, so there's no water line actually on the property. It's not mandated to connect. It's not mandated to extend to serve that use. Once again, the public water is not on site. That means the nearest connection point to the current SUP under consideration would be through the Fawn Lake subdivision, basically somewhere near the dam location in the development. And as always, the cost of the extension of that utility to meet that developer and meet that site's use is on the developer. So, if somebody comes in and wants to do a 1,000-lot subdivision a mile outside of the existing distribution system, they have to pay to extend that line to feed those 1,000 homes. Same thing would go for this situation here. Based on the initial review of the stated desired volumes, in order to meet 100,000 gallons a day, there will be improvements required to meet those target volumes. And whatever connection is allowed, the department is going to make recommendations to basically control the volume, which is how much water, the pressure. When I say pressure, basically the pressure impacts to the adjacent customers, which should be none. There should be no pressure impacts, no decrease in pressure from those customers. And then also evaluating and controlling the time of that withdrawal so that it may not be over a 24-hour period. You may be restricted between a certain time during the day based on the overall demands of the system directly in that pressure zone. So once again, these are some of the basic items that we are reviewing and we'll be going into considerably more detail on as part of the staff report.
Dr. Trimby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How do you enforce the volume restriction? I realize after the fact you'll know how much they use, but are you able to stop them from exceeding a certain volume, or is it only after the fact?
Yes, sir. We actually can stop any applicant from, or any customer from taking so much water. Basically, what would be done in a situation like this is the connection would need to include a flow control valve and also a pressure sustaining function. What that does is flow control could limit the volume of water, the flow rate that is taken over a certain period of time. And then the pressure sustaining would be set to where you wouldn't have pressure impacts to the other customers basically upstream of that connection point. So if the pressure dropped below a certain point, it would throttle that connection down to where, that flow rate may have been 100 gallons a minute. 5 minutes ago, but pressures have dropped, or there's a fire flow event or something like that occurs, and then that pressure would drop down to 50 gallons a minute. So there are ways that are valves that are established that are specifically can control that.
Thank you.
Mr. Skinner?
How do they plan to take the water? I don't completely understand that. Are they going to take that directly from Fawn Lake through a system they provide? Or are they going to hook up someplace down the line on our systems?
Basically, from the utility side, any connection would be between the proposed site and the public utility line within Fawn Lake. And what happens after that, whether or not that dumps into temporary storage tanks or a hydrant at that location or whatever, that for them to take any water from that collection location on their property to, a remote portion of the property, that's kind of on the user at that point. The utility is not part of that discussion.
Are there any restrictions on time of day they can take it?
Yes, sir. As stated, that based on the initial evaluations, we will have a volume, pressure, and time restriction that will be in place probably.
It seemed to me like early morning hours or something like that when nobody's using the showers or anybody's using the, everybody's sleeping. Sounds like a...
Yes, sir. We have demand projections, or basically demand curves for that zone, and we would match those times with that demand curve to maximize, the volume of water that could be taken from the system without impact to the customers.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
I got one. Is this violating any kind of policy as far as providing them water?
No, sir. We can actually go back and quote the exact references in the Chapter 20, which is subdivision, and Chapter 22, which is utilities, and the comprehensive plan. Generally, the way it has been looked at and enforced is that water basically can extend outside the primary settlement area without the change in the comprehensive plan or change in land use. What really comes into question is when you deal with sewer, which this is not included in this discussion at this time, is because basically the higher density development follows the sewer. So the intent behind the ordinance is that if you're outside the primary settlement area, if you can gravity into the primary settlement area, that's okay, as long as there's not a subdivision that's being created that creates individual lots, if it's a single parcel. But you couldn't pump sewer from outside the primary settlement area into the primary settlement area. It's basically just a way to control the density of development in the borderland areas around where the primary settlement area is established. So that typically, when you look at the extension of utilities, water, because literally by nature, water can run about wherever you want it to based on the line size and pumps and everything else. And it's really the sewer that is regulated through those documents.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Mr. Skinner?
So are they paying for the water?
For consumption?
Yes.
Yes, sir. They would be like any other customer.
So they're using such a high, they're going to be up at the higher, if they're using 100,000 gallons a day, are they not at the peak of our?
It would equivalent, 100,000 gallons a day is approximately, I believe, top of my head, about $500,000 to $600,000 in revenue a year if you take 100,000 gallons a day off our distribution system.
Okay.
So yes, the utility department cannot give away water, cannot give away service connections, cannot give away availability fees. That's restricted by bond covenants very explicitly. And so any type of connection would be paid for like anybody else.
Well, I would like, if it comes to us, and it'd be a nice thing to see where we're getting that figure from, as we've done before with the charts, and as the more you use, the more you pay, it seems like.
We can show that calculation.
I
based
would
on
like to see
100,000
that,
gallons.
and I'm sure the Planning Commission would like to see that too.
We can add that information in.
Thank you.
Ms. Marshall?
If we could, when we're talking about putting a water line to this site, and we just had a discussion about our fire flow issues and using on-site tanks, if we're gonna have a water line there, it would be great to have a fire hydrant there. Is there something you can require through utilities?
Yes, sir. We would require any type of connection onto the property or onto the proposed site would include fire hydrants at specified intervals. For no other reason, even if it's in the middle of the woods, we still have to flush that line and make sure water quality is maintained. So,
Right, okay, thank you.
yes, sir, it would be.
Go ahead, Dr. Chairman.
Going forward, I think the elephant in the room that hasn't been addressed much is the issues surrounding cadmium. I know that's something I don't know much about, but before making a decision, we're going to need to know what the dangers are.
And there is an analysis in the packet that was handed out this evening related to that. And I also wanted to mention one other item that is in that packet. sPower did prepare a question and answer sheet with some appendices that they asked that we provide to the board and the Planning Commission, and so that's included in the packet as well.
Thank you. Mr. Skinner.
Along those lines, the SUP is being submitted by sPower, correct?
Correct.
So, and sPower's been bought out, I understand. They're a subdivision of the...
Right.
Okay. So my question is, and my fear is this, how many LLCs are we going to be dealing with while we go through this project? My concern is that reason people go in LLC, because if they go under, it relieves them of all their obligations. I'm concerned that 10 years down the road, or even now, when we don't get something correct and it goes above the LLC's level, I mean, they can declare bankruptcy and it comes back on us, whichever comes back on the thing. Can we have a commitment from the corporation? To me, that's what's important. I mean, it happens. And how many LLCs are going to be involved in the construction of everything we see out here, of the 3,000 acres? I'd like to know that, because I'm not comfortable with dealing with an LLC. I want the person who's backing this, the big corporation, to make a commitment to this county if we do it.
That is a concern that we've heard, and we are working on that.
Okay.
Any other questions, concerns from the discussion from the board? All right, well, I thank you all very much. I know the citizens out there, this isn't certainly not answering all your questions.
Well,
I hope you see what it is still being worked on. You should get some more information. I think Ms. Parrish said Thursday.
Wanda, before you go.
So, one second. Go ahead, Mr. Skinner.
Thank you. I'm sorry to do. I was just looking at some of these. I would like, as Paul said, I'd like to look at the difference. I guess it's the type of panels they're using. You know, I heard Culpeper made them go all silicone. Okay, and then rather than cadmium telluride or whatever it's called. Anyway, I would like to see if why are they going 50-50? What is that? I mean, is that to save money? And the other thing is, sorry, I'm going to go back once again, but the arc, if it's truly 5,400 degrees Fahrenheit, that exceeds well over what the cadmium will melt at. I think cadmium's up around 2,000 Fahrenheit. So I'd like to be known more about that, please. And the other thing that you've mentioned, can they remove the debris without burning it? Maybe big, I mean, they have some pretty big mulches out there.
That's one of the things we've been discussing is our expectation is that at least a vast majority of the debris on site would have to be ground versus burned. In addition, that any burning on site could not be a surface burn. It would have to be done with a trench and a blower to reduce the amount of emissions. But our desire would be that they grind as much of that as possible on site.
Oh, and the last thing is the reclamation. We didn't really talk a lot about the reclamation of the land. And what I'm looking for is a commitment, not from the LLCs, from the big people, that they're going to, no matter what happens, and if for some reason, I don't know how we do this, but if they declare bankruptcies, that we are the head of the line to get whatever funds we can to do the reclamation. I mean, this is a big project. The biggest thing we'll ever do, probably. And I need to know for sure that the county's not going to be held responsible for any of this stuff.
Wanda, is that in our packet from the engineers at all?
There is an analysis of the applicant's decommissioning plan in the packet, yes.
Okay.
And the last thing, Chief, maybe you can answer this. Is there a speed up to like a hurricane? I mean, we have had hurricanes come up this way. What are these panels? How much wind can they sustain? Because we've seen pictures of, and I know it's Category 5, and I understand that's unusual, but
I think we just got some figures today. It's 2,000 pascals, which is equal to what, 139 miles per hour? If I remember correctly.
so that's a Category 4, I believe.
It was, I think it was a strong Category 3, approaching Category 4.
Approaching Category 3.
127, I'm sorry.
Okay. Those are questions I need to get answered, at least. We should be discussing. All right, well, thank you for giving us an update.
Good luck, Wanda.